Okay.
And now we're live. Yay! Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. This is my channel, but today I'm with my YouTuber friends, and my English isn't strong enough, so I'll have somebody moderate for us. So maybe Renegade will do.
Yes.
Please.
I can take care of moderation. That's fine. So I'm not appearing on camera. I'm instead showing off my fancy watches,
rotating
and stuff like that. But I will handle moderation. I think we'll start with some introductions, and then we will get into a few specific topics, and we'll take some questions from the audience. So first, we'll do introductions. Yoko, how about you go first?
Oh, yes. So I'm Yoko. I'm Japanese living in Japan, and I've lived all my life here in my country. And I'm very well known as a huge Trump supporter. And I would say I'm an activist, like a political activist and journalist, and happily married. That's about it, I guess. Yeah.
That's plenty. Thank you. Nobita, how about you introduce yourself?
どうも、皆さんこんにちは、のび太と申します。今は、
My Japanese.
Japanese is great. Let's try some English then.
He hasn't switched yet. Like, he had a long day of work.
I'm speaking Japanese too much recently. I kind of forgot the English. Sorry.
That's all right.
I can't speak English. Sorry. No, joking.
You have a huge channel.
No, actually, my English is quite bad. So, I'm actually Nobita from Doraemon's character. No, sorry.
Oh, that was a joke.
そうですね。My name is Nobita. Nice to meet you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. Thanks, Nobita. That's perfect.
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel like Nobita from Japan, mainly about like social issues or cultural difference about Japan. And I'm mainly like interviewing lots of different people, like including Yoko-san. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
Nice. That's perfect. Thanks a lot, Nobita. So next, how about we have Black Pigeon or Felix introduce himself in case people don't know.
Yeah, I'm Felix. I run the Black Pigeon Speaks channel, and I'm very happy to be back in the company of.
Oh, you might have cut out again.
Oh,
your internet working? Okay. Well, he's having a little bit of a technical difficulty there. That's fine. Give him a sec.
oh shit!
You trying a new mic?
Maybe press something.
Or don't press something.
Oh, yeah.
All right, we'll give him a sec to figure it out. I can introduce myself while he's fixing that. So my name is TheRenegadeOfFunk. I am a consultant living in Japan, based in Tokyo. I'm originally from Jamaica and grew up in New York. Hence the New York accent, still semi-anonymous. So instead of appearing on camera, I'm showing off my fancy watches. I have a presence on Twitter and a blog. I'm sure there will be links and anything else relevant. Yeah, that's basically it. Oh, you can see I'm also a black person, so that means I can't be racist. So no complaining about anything I say. Oh, I'm also a member of Mensa, so that means by far the smartest person here. So there's that too. And,
am I back yet? Can you guys?
I think you are.
Yeah,
I think you are.
All right.
Yeah,
thanks. Sorry,
really
I've just got this. I've got this new microphone that I don't ever use, and it's got all of these buttons on it. And I guess I sit back and I press them, and I don't know what I've pressed. So it's just my boomer tech abilities.
That's fine.
So I was just saying, I'm glad to be back with you guys. I really much enjoyed our previous live stream, and Renegade and I are friends here in Tokyo, and so I see him quite regularly, actually. So so we know each other, and hopefully we'll have a very constructive and interesting conversation.
I hope so. I hope so. So now that we have everyone introduced, we'll go through a few topics, and of course, people in the chat are welcome to ask questions. Super chats we'll address as well sooner if people want to donate. I think our first topic will just be coronavirus and kind of this general situation in Japan versus the States or versus other countries. So from what my impression living in Tokyo is that things are gradually returning to normal. Things are opening again, even though we're seeing more cases. But everyone's basically out. Just everyone is wearing masks. Now, Yoko, you're based in Fukuoka, right? So is it basically the same situation out there? What is your experience with coronavirus?
Probably the same. That everyone is getting back out, and but it's really annoying though that we must wear the mask. So like, I personally, I shouldn't, but when I walk outside, I don't wear any mask, and only when I enter some building or something, I put it on, and then I take it off. So
it's very uncomfortable, especially in the summertime.
Yeah, and I'm a woman, and I wear makeup, so like I don't want to. I draw my face, so I don't want to mess it up, you know. So
I hear you. Yeah, Nobita, what's your experience with coronavirus been? Have you been stuck inside a lot? Are you getting out at all?
Actually, I'm actually often go running.
Running?
But, you know, with mask. Yeah, running.
Oh.
Yeah. So it's really uncomfortable. But I feel...
Yeah, I wonder.
Very. But I think social pressure is very strong in Japan, especially Tokyo area. So if they see anyone, I can hear something.
Oh, there's some noise in the background. No worries.
Okay. So if they see anyone like going outside without mask, that person instantly got a cold stare or criticized a lot. So that pressure is probably more than other countries in Japan, I think.
Yes.
I agree.
I think that's very true. I don't worry a lot about it because people stare at me anyway. Being a large black guy with a beard, I already get a lot of stares. So I figure I can just do whatever I want. But I do wear masks indoors if I go into stores and things like that, just to be polite. What about you, Pigeon? How's the coronavirus situation been for you?
Well, I think, you know, you and I talked about this one time previously. Like, I've found the sort of social isolation to be somewhat not very good for my mental health. I didn't like the idea of not really being able to go out and see people. There's no sort of social things you can do like movies or baseball games or festivals. There's no, and I've just kind of found that there's this open-ended. With COVID-19, we still have closed borders. We don't know when it's going to end, and I almost feel like a rat in a cage, somewhat, to be honest with you. So what I did is I thought it would help. I rented out a house. I was saying to you guys before we went live, I rented out a house here in Kyoto, Japan, because I thought it'd be good just to get a different sort of view on things for a while. And you know, it's been actually kind of a little bit depressing because there's been torrential rain for the past week to the point of, you know, causing a lot of damage across the country and deaths as well. And you can't really go anywhere. So I'm stuck in this house that's not mine. And you know, and I think I told you, like, when I went walking around, like, this is a very tourist oriented city. The last time I came here was a couple of years ago with my nephew, and I said I would never come back because it was just overrun with tourism. And I was never going to go back, but then I figured this might be a good opportunity. But there's like nobody here now. Like, the streets are empty, the shops, a lot of them I think are just, especially where you have the temples and all of the sort of famous parts of the city, there's no tourism there, so just everything's closed. So
Yeah.
it's very weird. Tokyo to Kyoto is a very different sort of kettle of fish, but
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of this whole COVID stuff, and I'm kind of glad that Japan didn't go for any of these hard lockdowns like the UK or the US, though.
That's true. That's true. And it's an interesting subject about how Japan responded and the difference in culture. I think that's something I would want to get Yoko's perspective on. But just to say kind of my experience, it's been pretty good because I can already work from home. I do a lot of programming work. And it was weird. The lockdown kicked in at kind of a weird time in my life, right when I finished converting to become Catholic. I had my first communion in April. And so my biggest priority then was I wanted to go to church. I wanted to go to Mass. And all of the churches were shut down for a while. I finally found one in Yokohama that I could go to. And so because of that, it's really helped with my mental health, keep my sanity about things. Yeah, I mean, the religious side of it is a whole other issue we could talk about. But I'm interested in, so there wasn't a hard lockdown. You know, the Japanese government suggested that people stay home, suggested that people wear masks. And for the most part, I think Japanese citizens are very respectful of their government. You know, they weren't out protesting and complaining as much as Americans. So I guess I would ask Yoko's perspective on this. What do you think about the Japanese government's response to coronavirus and the Japanese people response? Do you have a positive opinion of it? What are your thoughts?
I think the Japanese government did everything that they could do. Like, we have a lot of limitations, and whenever the government tries to, let's say that the government tried to do a lockdown like in the US, that would be, if they did that, then the government would be bashed so hard by the leftists here, like the lawyers and everyone, like, human rights kind of type of people are all like left biased, and those people will bash the administration so bad. So I don't think that, like, what I think is that the government didn't want to take that risk. And at the same time, still it worked. Like, it wasn't a real ban, but people listened. And it's not really because of the government's power, but because of our culture in which we're so, like, I can't find the right word, but we're really strict to each other. So especially in like rural area or like far from cities, you go to like villages or something, and somebody brings the virus back home or something, and then the house is like smashed, people smash the windows and like destroy the house, or like graffiti and so on. And that's just the traditional side of Japan, like rural area to have that. So that's the fundamental thing in Japan. So even like in the cities, we are afraid of what other people think. So like we behave for the reasons, so not really about the politics side. So that's what I would say. Yeah.
No, I would totally agree with that. I think working in a lot of Japanese offices with a lot of Japanese and foreign staff, the thing I've noticed is that Japanese workers are very process oriented, whereas the foreign staff, particularly Americans, are more results oriented. So the Japanese staff, they're very focused on the process, on following the rules and the procedure. And so once it's established that there's a certain expectation, everybody gets on board. Whereas the foreign staff, they're more skeptical. They always want everything justified and explanations. And there are good and bad things with that difference. But in a pandemic, which is a group action problem, you need to coordinate and get everyone to do the same thing. It's kind of good to have that culture where everyone is on the same page. And so I guess I could ask Nobita about this. What are your thoughts about the Japanese culture compared to somewhere like America, where there's a lot of diversity, shall we say? There's a lot of division and disagreement, and so you have a lot of protests and a lot more people getting infected, a lot worse experience with coronavirus. So what are your thoughts on that difference?
Yeah. I think it's kind of good and bad. So on the like the upside, people follow the rule. So like probably like especially in this situation, like even though like just a small percentage of people act recklessly, that's gonna might spread a lot, like the US. So in that sense, actually quite effective this kind of group oriented mindset. But sometimes I know some like friend actually whose family actually got infected, and he's also kind of discriminated by that because of that.
Yes.
So sometimes it's kind of too much. That kind of joint responsibility.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'd agree. I think generally there's trade-offs there, and in a situation like a pandemic or a disaster, it's great if there's if everyone's on the same page. The way I've heard it described is that Japan is a very high context culture. There's a lot that's assumed. You don't have to explain things explicitly. Even in the Japanese language, they don't often use subjects. They don't say, anata wa, watashi wa. It's like, I know the subject. If you can just assume certain things. Whereas when you have a more diverse culture, you have to be more explicit. You have to say exactly what you expect, and you have to spell things out. People disagree and argue. So, I could take that to Felix, to Pigeon here. The virus pandemic, what does it put in your mind about Japanese culture, good and bad things?
Well, I mean, you can always sort of pick and choose what you think is the right course of action, what's the wrong. I mean, how one is better than the other. But I think proof is in the pudding, in the fact that you've got a city like Tokyo, and I think it's the greater metro area is 39 million people, which is larger than Australia, but they're only, their hospitals aren't overflowing. They're not like, the IC units aren't being, used to a maximum capacity. It is in a group-oriented action, like you said, in fighting a pandemic. It's definitely a better, course of action than all of this sort of chaos you're seeing in the United States, as we were talking about previously before when we went live, and we were just talking about the situation in New York City, and it's just dreadful. I find a lot of Japanese things to be a bit pedantic and somewhat annoying at times. I mean, but as civilization is a group effort, and while individually it may not have as enjoyable an outcome as, say, somewhere like the United States, where you just do whatever the hell you like, it does help to have this kind of coordination between people during times of crises or civilizational stress tests. And I mean, if you guys are kind of hinting at it, but the thing is a lot of people don't realize is that the Japanese government was clear. They said, we don't have the legal right, or we don't have the legal instruments to force people to stay home. So we're not going to. We're going to ask them to. And people did. And I would say that this, as a large country, I mean, it's over 100 million people, has done pretty well for not even having hard lockdowns. As a percentage of the population, I mean, for whatever their infection rate is per 100,000, I'm assuming it's probably a lot lower than the UK or Spain or the US or even, I don't know, Australia, if they're going into a second lockdown in Melbourne, is what I read today. So I mean,
yes.
And they just seem to be able to, get along to go along. They're not freaking out about masks. It's like, okay, it's uncomfortable, but everybody will wear them. Okay, well, we don't want to, have baseball canceled, but okay, I guess we can't go to baseball, or I guess we can't have our festivals. I guess we can't have our Olympics. This city is truly cursed. I did not realize that the 1940 games were supposed to be in Tokyo as well, and they were canceled for World War II. And now this is 2 out of 3 times that they've had canceled Olympics. So it's a cursed city.
Yeah, that is kind of bad luck. I didn't know that. Although I guess you could argue the 1941 was more their fault. But anyway, the coronavirus question, I think there's a good transition there into the topic of Black Lives Matter, BLM protests, because as we saw in the States, concern about coronavirus basically disappeared once the protests started at the end of May. You had the let me see. There was the Arbery case with the person who was chased down in the street, and then that was in Georgia, and then there was the George Floyd case, the black man who had a knee put on the back of his neck, which led to these mass protests and riots. And there's a distinction there. There's peaceful protests, and then there are riots. You don't want to conflate the two, but it was interesting. The protests started, and suddenly everybody stopped talking about coronavirus as though it didn't matter anymore. So I guess I want to go around and get let's start by getting people's opinion on the George Floyd case and the protests. I'll just quickly say, I think for George Floyd, what happened to him was an injustice, having that illegal hold, the knee on the neck. There's some debate that it's a legitimate tactic at times, but I believe, according to the training, it should only be done for short periods of time. And so that, along with the fact that, he died shortly after, some people argue that he had other health issues. I don't think that that's relevant. I think that there's obviously a recklessness there. He probably shouldn't be charged with murder, but some sort of negligent homicide or reckless endangerment. I think there's a clear callousness there that we could all get behind and criticize. But unfortunately, the legitimate issue is sort of lost when the riots started. And I have been very critical of Black Lives Matter. I've said on Twitter and other places that I don't think it's really about helping Black people at all. I think it's more about pushing a Marxist agenda and kind of using Black suffering as political fuel. So I'm very critical of it, and I will go deeper into my own views later. But let's go around and kind of high level talk about it. Yoko, what was your thought initially on the Floyd case and the riots? What was your reaction?
My first impression of that was like the comeback of 2016. Like back then, also BLM movement was really like going around, and so I just saw it like, oh, this is again like in the year of presidential election, and they're agitating this again to bash the current administration. And I also heard that back in the day, I don't remember the years, but when Clinton was chosen as the US president, in that same year, there was this like Los Angeles like riots, like a racial problem happened in the year as well. So it's been like a pattern to my eyes. So I just feel really bad for the real victims that these really tragic incidents are politicized, and it's not about them, and rather it's about like attacking people. So yeah, that's how I feel.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I would agree with a lot of that. Nobita, did you do a video about this? I think you did a couple of videos about Black Lives Matter. So maybe you can give us a summary of your view and some of the points that you made in your videos.
So I think what happened in the US, George Floyd was obviously horrible, horrifying, terrible. So I can understand people's anger, and I'm actually okay with as long as it's peaceful and no one gets hurt. But obviously some people using that for political purpose, like the Communist Party or Antifa or stuff like that. So that's that's something I'm not happy about. And obviously during this pandemic, going outside and gathering event, it's really risky, right? And that happened spread to all over the world. So at this point, it's more harmful. I think.
Yes,
unfortunately,
I would agree. And before I get to Felix here, either Yoko or Nobita, I'd like to ask, what do you think about the fact that there are Black Lives Matter protests in Japan? I mean, that was very surprising to me. What's the point of having such protests here? Does that seem strange to you? What do you think is the relevance of that?
I go first.
Yeah, sure. Ladies first.
So there was a Black Lives Matter protest here in my prefecture, Fukuoka, as well, even though we never see Black people. But I heard, though, that there was like hundreds of people that gathered for the protest, and probably 50 or 100, I don't remember, but so many like foreigners came. And
the same was in Tokyo. The Tokyo was exactly the same. It was like 3/4 foreigners, so it's the same thing.
Yeah, so that sort of protest happened, and before that, actually, the local like information paper, that free paper thing, covered the two organizers of the event, and like it was an interview of these two Black women, and I just saw the Facebook post of the free paper, so I was really shocked because it's such a political thing. And this local, just like a town information paper is taking it up. So I was like, "What's going on? Like, why are you covering this? This is political things, and there are Communist Party people that are supporting this. So what are you doing, free paper?" So I wrote stuff like that, and then one of the organizers, came on to my post to attack me, saying that, "Oh, you are ignorant. You don't know anything. Study." I'm talking about the social background here, that that sort of movements are like agitated by the leftists here, and their goal is actually to make the laws such as to like hate speech kind of laws to silence us Japanese and be tolerant to foreigners or more like globalist type of ideas. So it's not really about, in Japan, Black Lives Matter is not really about Black Lives Matter. It's about creating this political background to control the Japanese. So that's what I was writing about in the post. And however, the organizer kept saying like, "Oh, you're ignorant." And at one point she said, "Be quiet." So that's right there. That was so symbolic. So,
that sounds like a kind of the leftist approach to debate. Is basically you shut up and do what I say. That's the way they kind of talk. Nobita, what about you? What are your thoughts about the fact that we have these Black Lives Matter protests in Japan?
Yeah, I think I'm assuming it's not just about Black people. Obviously, it's more like anti-racism, all all against non-Japanese people, like including Korean, Chinese. Yeah, that's the purpose. And I actually asked quite many Japanese people about that, about Black Lives Matter in Japan.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
it's good. I have to watch the videos.
Yeah. So kind of mixed feelings. So some people actually think like it's gave us great opportunity to think about the race issues. So that's actually great, or that kind of opinion. But some people kind of actually quite uncomfortable. Why they do that now? Obviously the virus not yet. So yeah, especially online, so many people saying like that. Why they do that now? Yeah, that's the main. And Japan doesn't have like history like the US, slavery or stuff like that. So that's also they are kind of complain. Yeah.
Okay. That's thank you for that background. And
well, you had slavery, but you just enslaved each other. I mean,
well, that's true. There were. Yeah, it's a little bit different. I mean, it's not one race enslaving another.
Yeah,
it's a little bit of a different vibe there. So then, Felix, why don't you tell me your thoughts about, I guess, just generally the George Floyd case and the riots, and how your perspective has changed from being in Japan.
Well, I mean, I think obviously it doesn't goes without saying. I mean, the manner of his death was quite. I remember watching that video before all of the protests started, and I was quite horrified by it. And it's also because of the fact that, you know, I've seen police killing other people, and they're not black. There was one that kind of was a little bit on my radar, and it was in, I believe, Arizona, and it was a guy in a hotel hallway, and he was crawling on.
I know this one.
Crying. Yeah, he was killed by a policeman, just gunned down. And literally, he was in a pair of shorts, socks, and a t-shirt, and they just gunned him down. And I don't think that there is systemic racism within policing in the United States. I think that there just is, you know, a lot of shitty people. And I think that if you're a policeman, I don't know who would want to be a policeman in the environment in 2020. I mean, I just don't. But I think these people are dealing with shitty people all day long, every day, and they probably just become, you know, jaded and you know, the way they are. And I think the Black Lives Matter, what they're doing is exactly what Yoko said, is they're trying to tag this killing of this man, George Floyd, into a political message going into November. I mean, I saw over the 4th of July weekend, and I had to pull it up because I couldn't believe the numbers. The 4th of July weekend in Chicago saw 87 people shot, 17 of them fatally, including a 7-year-old and a 14-year-old. But you don't hear Black Lives Matter talking. I mean, if Black Lives Matter, these lives should matter too, I would think. But the way I look at it is exactly kind of what you and Yoko said put together, is that this is an attempt at political posturing, but it's also an attempt at politicking in a Marxist fashion. And the thing about Black Lives Matter is it is a political organization. It's a well-funded political organization. As far back as 2016, they had $100 million in their coffers. It's a very well-oiled political machine, and it's come back from you know, the nether regions right before another presidential election. So, and what's more important, it's one of the only political organizations that's lobbying for change. It's lobbying for what it wants. It wants defunding of police. It wants abolishing police. But it's one organization, the only organization, political organization. Well, there's probably a couple others, but you're not allowed to criticize. Right? You're not allowed to criticize it. And you'll see, like, Black Lives Matter as a logo is now. I was watching a European soccer game the other day, and they have it on their soccer jerseys. So I mean, this is a political organization, and it has to be seen as such. And I think that a lot of people are missing that aspect of it. And like you said, I believe the founders, the two ladies, or 3 ladies that founded it, they're all very open about being Marxist trained agitators. They're very open about it. So I think if nobody's actually within these protests talking about how you could make individual and Black communities better or improve their lot in life, rather than just you know, yelling and burning shit down. Well, what about, you know, talking about how to incentivize, you know, the marriages staying together and kids not being brought up in broken homes. I mean, there's definitely concrete measures you could take to improve Black communities' performance and life and what sort, but none of that's being talked about as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. And it's probably the most frustrating thing to me about Black Lives Matter as a Black man. You know, I really do wish that they had a more practical focus on actually supporting the community, but instead it's much more of a political focus, which is why they don't really care about when you know, Black criminals kill someone in the inner city, people get shot in
87
like
over the 4th of July weekend in one city. I mean, that's
don't care.
Astounding. That's astounding to me.
They don't care because there's no political value in caring, right? They can't demand anything from it. It's just it's just an ugly fact that they accept, and it's a statistic that helps them to make more demands of the larger white society. So this is kind of the really dark side of Black Lives Matter and a lot of these activist groups. They generally don't want the Black community to improve. The suffering is political fuel. As long as they can keep them dependent and, you know, spiritually oppressed, feeling like they can't get ahead, unless they demand reparations and handouts from white people. As long as they keep that going, then it translates into money and votes and power. So they have an incentive to keep things bad instead of focusing on, as people have said, the real issue, which, you look at the statistics, police shootings of police killings of black men are statistically minor compared to the larger problems.
There was 8 in 2019.
Yeah, it's not the real issue.
It was 8. It was 8 unarmed black men that were killed by police. And I read that this was put out by Charlie Kirk, right? So obviously that got jumped on.
Of course.
But the thing was, but they were trying to say it wasn't right because, some people might have died from tasing or some people might have died from. So, I mean, whatever the case may be, it's not a very high number. It's not like the police are out there in communities hunting down people and just randomly shooting them. I mean, it's not. And
you look at the evidence of that is the fact that there's similar numbers of killings of people of other races as well. It's not just black people that are victims of police incompetence and brutality. But just again, as a matter of supporting the black community, I've said many times the bigger issue is the family structure, is the breakdown of families. The fact that 80% of black kids are being born out of wedlock and being locked into a cycle of generational poverty and dependence. I have said before, I don't think the issue is systemic oppression, systemic racism. If there is oppression of black people, I think it's a spiritual and psychological oppression. I think it's a spiritual oppression by a liberal white society that wants to keep them dependent, wants to keep on signaling its virtue by seeing them as less than human, needing their handouts, needing them to take care of them. And I think that's a much deeper and more degrading and insidious form of oppression. Slavery, physical bondage, is very direct and honest and straightforward. There's a nobility in resisting it. But spiritual oppression, where you get a person to believe that they're enslaved, you get them to believe that they're inferior, you get them to believe that they can't do anything unless you help them and do stuff for them, that's much worse. That's much more degrading and offensive. And I've really come to appreciate that as I've studied more about religion and gone to church more and thought more about it more widely. That's the thing that depresses me about Black Lives Matter. It really is a political organization exacerbating the problems. So anyway, I could probably rant for like an hour about race issues. It's extremely vexing to me. But why don't we talk a little bit more about kind of the difference in perspective in America and Japan? We talked a little bit about the protests and how it seems odd that they're appearing in Japan. Would you say, I can ask Yoko this question, would you say this is an example of globalization, of like America exporting its culture around the world? The fact that we have Black Lives Matter protests in Europe, in South America, all around the world, it kind of shows that leftism is a very international movement in a way.
Absolutely. I was just going to say that it's like if something happens in America, just the idea that they have to then export it, right? So you have a situation where a man in Minneapolis is killed by the local police, and then somehow we're going to have a protest in Fukuoka. It's just weird, like how internationalized the sort of, like you just said, the left and their sort of media activists that pose as journalists. But I mean, most of these people long ago even gave up the semblance of attempting to have some sort of impartiality. But yeah, it just seems like you're kind of alluding to the idea that all of these things then somehow become internationalized. It's like, can you imagine if a policeman shot some guy in Kitakyushu and somehow there would be a protest march in St. Louis?
No, there wouldn't be.
So, I don't think so.
No, there wouldn't.
So,
and so this is what I wanted to ask Yoko about. Like, you have a lot of knowledge about leftist movements and how they have a very international scope. What do you think is the way for Japan to resist this aspect of globalization, of America exporting kind of the worst of its culture, the international nature of leftism? How can we understand that and push back against it?
I think that the important thing is to learn that in each country, like especially the US and Japan, we have similar problems caused by similar tactics by the left. So, like for example, in America, it's white guilt based and it's Black Lives Matter. But here in Japan, we already have something similar to that for decades, which is called, well, it's not officially called, but my friend and I call this Korean Lives Matter. And it's based on war guilt, like the guilt of the World War II that in the post-war regime or post-war society here in Japan, we learn in school that like how horrible Japan was during the World War II, and that we're just imprinted like white guilt kind of stuff, that we are really guilty to be born as Japanese because our ancestors were so bad during the World War II and so on. So there is the guilt imprint here in Japan. And with the background, I look at the US and it's the same thing happening, white guilt. And then the guilt imprint is there, and then white people are bashed and so on. And so what I see is, of course, the Black Lives Matter movement is happening here, but it's the same people agitating the same kind of things with the same kind of tactics. And what I can say is that the left side is using any opportunity to attack on the natives of our country and so on, to silence us and to bring a communist agenda. And Japan is often misunderstood, but during the World War II, or I don't know when it was, but when Soviet Union was still alive, they established the Japanese counterpart, like the Japanese branch of Comintern, and that is the Japanese Communist Party, and that still exists here, and they have national diet seats. So
I find that incredible when you see the posters for those guys. Like how can you have a communist party? I know, I think it's incredible.
Yeah. So,
but I would also add to that, it's very interesting, and you've got to actually follow the reasons why these things happen. If you go to Taiwan was very much at the same time colonized the same way the Korean Peninsula was. And if you take a look at the National University in Taipei, as well as the National University in Seoul, both of those were founded by the Japanese occupational government. I mean, it's like, if you take a look at a picture of Pyongyang or Seoul before Japan's occupation and after, it's like, they landed and then they just created all this infrastructure and stuff for them. And if you go to Taiwan, the Taiwanese, and I think there's several reasons for it, most likely because they don't like the communists in China, but the Taiwanese, they love Japan and they love Japanese people, and they were colonized just the same way as the Koreans were, But if you talk to Taiwanese people, they love the Japanese fashion and the music and the food and you go to Taiwan and everyone's like, yeah, okay. And I've been to Korea. And I like Korean people, but if I ever told them, I'm living in Japan, they get really angry. Like, do you know what Japan did in the war? And I'm like, well, I'm not Japanese. I'm not Japanese, so I'm not responsible for it. So I think that there has to be a reason for it. There's obviously the sort of like, Korea's in between culturally two juggernauts, and it's been a battlefield for 1,000 years. But there's obviously, I think, other reasons for it, why there's just this deep-seated intergenerational hatred in Korea for the Japanese, and it's I'm not nuanced as you are, Yoko, on all of this, but I can just see it from an outsider's point of view, looking at the examples of Taiwan and Korea and how vastly different they are.
I actually do want to ask Yoko one other question about this. So I think it was interesting you pointed out there's a similar kind of guilt tactic, where in the States, in America, there's this idea of white guilt, that white people have to be guilty about what their ancestors did. And a similar thing in Japan, Koreans or Chinese say Japanese have to be guilty about what they did in World War II. I would argue, and maybe you disagree, but I would argue that the guilt tactic doesn't work as well on the Japanese as it does on white people in Western countries. White people in Western countries, there's a lot of them out there marching and protesting with Black Lives Matter. There's a lot of very left-wing liberal white people. But I don't think the Japanese have the same feeling of guilt about their culture in World War II. So why do you think that is? What do you think is the reason that Japanese are less affected by this guilt tactic?
I think we are influenced by that, like as deeply as the U.S., but our reactions are different. Japanese people don't go violent and create riots and so on, because that's, again, it's like we censor each other, like traditionally. Wait, sorry, I kind of lost my thoughts, like train of thoughts.
The difference in this sort of guilt tactic between white people and Japanese people. I'm wondering if there's something that the Westerners could learn from Japan about how to resist this attempt, because I think it's sort of ridiculous. I think it's to blame people for their ancestors.
Okay, thank you. Now I remember what I was gonna say. So, like, Japanese people are just passive. That when we are told like what to think, we are like, okay, and like same as COVID-19 situation, that this is what you are supposed to do, or this is how you are supposed to think. Then we're like, okay, all right, and then we're like complaining here and there, but eventually we listen and like adjust ourselves. So like guilt imprint is there, but we're like, hey, yeah, I guess back in the day, yeah, maybe we were bad. That sort of things. Yeah, that's how I see. Yeah.
Nobita, would you agree with that? I mean, what is your opinion about the whole idea of Japanese guilt and white guilt?
Yeah, I actually before I asked quite some Japanese people about like the history, like Japan and Korea, and none of them actually knew about the history well, like Iwanfu Mondai. What is called in English? Yeah, history issue. So when it comes to history education, we don't take it like too seriously, probably as much as in the US. So yeah, I would say many of them don't even know that history.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's pretty true. I think some of it is just being a more subdued culture. Americans have a more passionate and younger political history, and so they're more inclined to look for causes to champion. But another argument I would make is, as someone mentioned in the chat, I think Japan just generally has a stronger sense of shared identity, has a strong sort of national identity around shared history, a long history, thousands of years, and a shared ethnicity as well, a shared bloodline. And that kind of helps to inoculate the culture from these external influences, these disruptive influences. Because as we said, leftism is a global movement. It's standardized in every country. It asks for the same things in every country. It's always about secularism and communism and homosexual liberation, feminist sexual liberation, these kind of standardized things. Unlike the political right, which is different in every country. Every country has a different identity, has different nationalist views of itself, and it's one of the disadvantages of the right that it's not unified globally. And so the only way to resist these leftist agitation is to have some kind of shared identity beyond just material things. And I would argue that's one of the problems in Western countries. I'm sure Felix can expand on this, is that in Western countries, there really isn't any sort of shared cultural identity beyond materialism, beyond just the GDP. And so I think that's why leftism and progressivism has become so powerful. There's a spiritual void that people are trying to fill with these political causes. I don't know if you'd like to expand on that.
I would agree with that. I think if you take a look at probably the past 50 years with the sort of abandonment of the church, also the movement away from cities and communities and small towns into these sort of soulless suburbs. I mean, I think that there's a big aspect, especially where we don't even really have communities anymore. There's no, just even the way, I think there was an author, and his name is Howard Kunstler. That's his real name with a K. It's
Gotcha.
very, very unfortunate, but he's an interesting author. He writes about things like oil, but he also wrote a book called The Geography of Nowhere, and it was basically a critique of the sort of movement to the suburbs after the end of the Second World War. And he was talking about, how they're built and the kind of communities that are created out of them. And I think that what we've lost is a sense of any kind of group, any kind of community. And we've just become these sort of atomized, as you said, atomized consumers only chasing GDP, and nothing else matters. And I think that this is one of the bigger aspects. Like, you'll really notice Japan in the summertime in a normal year. And sorry, that was just my bird. You'll notice just all of these sort of community festivals that pop up, in June, July, August, September. And you'll have the entire, street come out, the old people, the kids. There's not the sort of age segregation that you see in Western societies. Like, the 20-year-olds are with the 20-year-olds, the 30-year-olds, you know what I mean? There's this age-specific segregation in almost everything. And I think that the lack of communities is part of the soul death of Western societies. Like, we've lost our communities, and then we sort of lose our attachment to each other, and then our responsibilities to each other, as well as our responsibilities, to our communities. Like, people don't feel bad about being antisocial because they don't feel like they're being, they're not being judged by anyone because nobody gives a shit about anybody else. So
I would agree.
And I think the one thing I really like in a normal year, and this is again why I think I'm losing my mind, and I came down to Kyoto hoping for something better, but I mean, it's just there's nothing to do. There's no baseball, there's no movies, you can't go bowling, there's no festivals, there's no traveling. It's like this, bringing it all the way back full circle to where we started. It's just it's these aspects that give your life meaning, and a lot of times, I found, like, when I'm in the United States, a lot of the times it's just you go out and buy shit and go home. These large parking lots, like in a sea of cars, and you drive there, and it's like 15 minutes from your car to the front of the big box retailer, for example. I would say that's just my sort of 2 cents on the value and the importance of community.
I think that happens. Can I say something?
No, go ahead. Sorry.
It's funny though, because while I was listening, I kept thinking like, oh, he's like complaining about your country being developed. This is what happens when your country is developed and it's saturated. So you're like, even though both Japan and the US are developed countries, the biggest difference that I feel is like how you connect in like hard times. Japanese people are disciplined, and the reason why is because we have so many natural disasters.
Absolutely.
Since the ancient times. So right now we just had like this massive heavy rain. And actually where I live, or like southern area of this Kyushu area of Japan, got affected very hard. And again, people are now like fundraising, and they're helping each other, trying to send a lot of stuff. And I know that it happens in the US too, but the frequency and the size of our disasters are like much more than the US. And so we have to be connected, and we have to cooperate, or else we die. So I think that there's this like this sense that kind of like makes us kind of bound to bond to each other.
You're right.
So
right.
I would ask Renegade on that. One thing I've noticed, just not being Japanese myself, but I've noticed that, and I think it's because of what Yoko was just talking about, is the frequency and the size of the natural disasters. The Japanese people have got to be one of the most stoic people in the face of adversity that I've ever seen. They'll have somebody who just lost their house, from a rain or something on the TV, and they're like, oh, so this.
Yeah.
that they don't like. If that was in America, they'd be pulling their hair out, screaming all bloody murder and saying ah. So I find that it's an incredible sort of social, just an aspect of the Japanese people that I find very I find it very impressive just how stoic in the face of adversity Japanese people can be.
Well, I agree with that. And I think it comes from a culture and a sense of life that's not as materialistic. It's not as focused on things. If your entire value system is stuff, then a disaster is horrible because it destroys all your stuff. But if your value system is your community, your life, your people, your posterity, that sort of thing, then you can endure, you can move on, you can kind of see the bigger picture more easily. And I think that I agree with Yoko's point about the natural disasters kind of helping to bring them together as a community. You know, I've long said that probably the United States could do with a few more natural disasters to fix some of their cultural problems. But I think what natural disasters do is they show you that there's more to life than just accumulating wealth and status. And I actually think this is one of the advantages that the political left has. Implicitly, they understand this. They're not materialistic. They have a spiritual purpose beyond just stuff. On the right, they tend to have the same liberal philosophical premise, where they don't argue for any kind of norms or any kind of values. It's just a cultural void. Their only priority is the GDP. And so for some people that's satisfying. You know, some people can worship money. You have your libertarians and your objectivists who will make a religion of money. But most people don't find that satisfying. You know, I have my Bible here, right? Matthew 4:4, man shall not live by bread alone. I think humans have a innate desire for meaning, for something beyond just their day-to-day food and struggle. They need their experiences to have meaning. They need their lives to have meaning. And this is why the left attracts so many people. It gives people a story. It gives them a purpose. It gives them a sense of life beyond just the day-to-day. And their materialistic culture can't satisfy that spiritual hunger. And I think until the political right understands this, they're always going to be on the defensive and they're always going to be in a losing position. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
So I have a question. You know,
sure.
In the US, pretty much look left or right, right? It's quite divided. So what about the people in the middle? Kind of in the middle.
The middle is evaporating.
Moderate people.
Yeah, there's no middle.
How those people are treated usually?
It's a hard question to answer because the political center has shrunk a lot. It's very difficult.
Basically, it's puritanical in the United States now. I mean, you can have centrist positions, but the moment you have one position that is a little bit to the right, you're immediately called a Nazi or a fascist. I mean, like, you can be for abortion, you can be for interracial marriage, you can be for redistribution of wealth, but if you say you want a wall with Mexico, okay, that's Adolf Hitler Jr. So, so the problem with the United States is whatever constituted the middle, let's say back in the 1990s, it's just evaporated. It's become more, especially on the political left, because of sort of the abandonment of religion, and exactly what Renegade was just talking about is this sort of moral narrative that the left and the Marxist left are trying to inculcate into their true believers, that what you have now is almost a religious political ideology in certain respects. It's almost a religious experience for all of these people. And then if you are a person that has one position that is blasphemous, you're an infidel, you're a heretic, and you will be treated as such. So I mean, I would have called myself a centrist back in the day. I mean, I still hold, contradictory. I don't have an entire, set of values that are all one political direction, but it doesn't matter at this point, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm kind of similar. I think on a lot of social issues, I'm more right of center, but on some economic issues, I'm more left of center. I have a lot of focus on environmentalism and on economic fairness,
I agree with you 100%. I agree with you
100%. And this is in line with Catholicism. We try to prioritize taking care of the poor, taking care of the needy, and also being good stewards of the environment. So I'm not some doctrinaire right winger. But the thing is, there's no room for nuance because, as we've said, the left, it's not really a political organization anymore. It is more akin to a religion. And I don't say this to speak pejoratively of religion, negatively of religion. Religion is very powerful. The ability to make something holy, the idea of sacredness, makes a group more powerful. If you think about it in history, the idea of the holy is what allows people to override their instinct for self-preservation and to charge into a battlefield and fight to the death for a flag, for a queen, for a name, for a symbol. The idea of holiness is unique to humans. Other animals don't have this idea of taboos and sacredness. It's one of the things that makes us powerful. And the right has completely lost this idea of holiness. The left has it. We say it's like a religion because they excommunicate people and they have their liturgy, they have their heresy, right? And I think all of that's true. But we have to understand it's not a disadvantage. It's not their weakness, this type of thinking. It's one of the things that makes them hard to fight. And we have to reconcile that. I think this is a good transition into one other topic that I think Nobita wanted to, or Yoko both wanted to speak about, which is the issue of speech. With the left, we've seen a very puritanical attitude towards speech, which makes sense if we think of it as religious. If you're a Catholic and you agree with all the precepts of the church, but then you support abortion, that's heresy, right? And it's a similar thing with leftist ideology. You can't accept some of it; you have to accept all of it. And one of their concepts is this idea of hate speech. This idea of speech as violence that conflicts with the notion of free speech. So I'd like to ask Nobita about this. My understanding is there's some new hate speech laws and policies being debated in the Japanese government. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on and your perspective?
Yeah. It's actually kind of ordinance. So recently in Kawasaki. So let me share the link actually.
Sure. Yeah, you can post the link, and we'll share that.
Private chat, right?
Yeah, that's the private one. We'll share it out later. It's fine. This is in mynichi.jp, the article.
Yeah.
I'll tweet it later or something.
Yeah. So recently actually this is kind of getting a hot topic, and I'm quite confused by that because there is no definition actually. Mm-hmm. So kind of the definition is kind of fuzzy, and seems like this is only for some kind of bad speech against minority groups.
Sure.
Korean people, Chinese people. If you say black people should go back to slavery, that's obviously hate speech. But
it's not very nice.
Say all white people are racists, that's okay. Basically the same logic,
Sure. So it's only hateful if you say it against certain groups. If you say something negative against the majority groups, or the more powerful, the groups perceived as more powerful, then there's no protection. Is that correct?
Yeah, basically.
Okay. Yeah. Yoko, do you know anything more about this law in Japan?
Pretty much the same. Yeah, and really, I think I'll repeat what Nobita-san was saying, but it's not it's about the they want to prohibit the hate speech against foreigners here, and not the hate, and they do nothing about the Japanese, the ones that are against Japanese people. So that is what is happening. So for example, Prime Minister Abe, our current Prime Minister, he's always criticized, it's not even criticizes, he's so discriminated in a way that everyone, all the leftist people are telling him to die, and F Abe is what they keep saying, just like what they are doing in the US against President Trump. And those speeches are somehow allowed And there was this one case even like threatening to kill our prime minister, and that one got arrested, I believe, but because that's like threatening stuff, like blackmail. So that's illegal, but it's not. But like that sort of hate speech kind of speeches are always made on a daily basis. Like I, for example, used to, like, I don't somehow get those anymore, but I used to, back in the day when I was talking about Korean issues, people would come to me and really like leave hateful comments to me all the time, and like death threats and so on. But what's interesting is that Japanese people are one tribe also. Like we are one race, right? But somehow we are ignored, and that's something that we need to start like pointing out, I think, for like white people in the US as well.
Can I ask your perspective on one thing? So do you think that the problem is that the law is not applied to everyone? Or do you think that the law is just a bad law and there shouldn't be a hate speech law at all?
Of course, I'm against censoring. So I personally don't want such a law to be passed. But if it does, then it has to be the set with like like you can't make that speech against the Japanese people either.
I see. That's okay. That makes sense. So if it has to exist, then it should be consistent. Nobita, would you agree with that? Would you be against the law or just want it to be applied consistently?
To agree. So obviously, we shouldn't say like Koreans should go back to their country or something like that. We shouldn't do that. But I think if we make it law, the definition should be clear and objective. But it shouldn't be like subjective. So that's the problem. How we can make it objective and fair to everyone.
I see.
That's the quite difficult part.
Okay. And Pigeon, what are your thoughts about hate speech laws generally?
Well, I don't think hate speech exists. Only free speech does. You've got speech that some people aren't going to like, but the whole point about having the freedom to speak your mind is about working out what are the best ideas. Now, I could say some outrageous things, and you can disagree with me, you can agree with me, but trying to censor or try to control what people are saying in discourse or in discussion, it's a ticket to fascism. It's a ticket to authoritarianism. And who decides what speech is? I mean, you already have stuff like inciting violence is not allowed, even in the United States, right? I mean, once you start to incite violence, but I mean, if I hurt your feelings, I mean, right now, everything that basically disrupts the feathers of some of the, these young snowflakes in the United States, they call violence. Your speech is violence. You said my tits sag. Oh, that's violence against me. Like I'm not one to try and regulate people's obviously, but here in Japan it's a hard one because I mean, there are. I've seen one of my favorite ones is it's a video that's floating around the internet, and it's out front of the Washington Hotel in Shinjuku, and it's a right-wing demonstration, and these white people come out of the front of the lobby of the Washington Hotel, and there's like white big gum, white big gum, and okay, that's really insulting, but I mean, sure. Why can't he say that? You know what I mean? Like, right. He should have every right to say it if he wants to. So, would be
I see where you're coming from. I want to just address. We did get a couple of super chats from one person. A thank you, and then
one. I can do this.
Yeah.
Sorry for the earlier one. I don't know.
I think it was a thank you.
Oh yeah. You said thank you. So thank you. In this one.
Quebec. I guess he's from Quebec.
I hope so.
Somebody read that for me.
Sure. There's a third option. Make hate speech laws that are not consistent. only hate speech that targets Japanese should be punishable. So right, like this would be very consistent with, say, Muslim countries that have blasphemy laws. You know, you protect the majority, so you could make a moral case for it. This is sort of consistent, somewhat consistent with my view on hate speech laws. I think it depends on the type of society you want to create. If you're trying to create a liberal society, a proper classical liberal society, then you shouldn't have hate speech laws. You should tolerate all free speech that's not explicitly a threat of violence or slander. So in that type of society, I would oppose hate speech laws. But I think there are other types of societies, such as, you know, theocracies, religious societies, that might have hate speech laws about the majority or about their religion. And I think that's fine for those countries. You know, if you believe in nationalism, then you believe in countries having the right to do their own thing, to have their own values. So they might choose to value their religion more than absolute free speech. And that's their choice. And if people don't like that, they can try to change the government or they can move somewhere else. So that's my
a bad case for that, though, is Indonesia, where they have basically tyranny of the Islamic majority over, you know, the religious minorities there, the Christians and the. So yeah, I mean, I understand that you agree, absolutely. But you know, having hate speech laws or religious blasphemy laws or any of these sorts of laws, because I've also heard of the same sort of problems cropping up in Pakistan with the Muslim majority and then Sikh or Hindu minority peoples. Where these speech laws are used as weapons against minorities, right? So
of course,
yeah. I think that even going down this is a slippery slope. Like, for example, I won't say it because we're on YouTube, but you know, if you insult the Prophet Muhammad in a lot of countries, I mean, whether that's a death sentence that's carried out by the state or by a mob that drags you out of the cop shop and you know, hangs you, lynches you. It is to insult the Prophet Muhammad in large swaths of the planet. That's a death sentence. So
absolutely.
And you know, this is the difference between, like you just said, if you want to live in a classically liberal society, you've got to make a choice, right?
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, there's obviously that trade-off. If you have a theocratic society, there's going to be persecution of the people who don't follow that religion. They're going to suffer oppression, and obviously I don't support persecution of Christians, but it's a reality of the world when you live in a society that has.
They're probably the most persecuted religious minority around the world.
Yeah, that's true.
Egypt, Pakistan, you know, places in the Levant, all kinds of places. It's awful. I mean, I've read just awful stuff that's happened in places like to the Coptic Christians, for example.
Yeah, it's pretty terrible. It's pretty terrible. But you know, it's a faith that in some ways thrives on persecution. You know, their church grew basically from the blood of martyrs. So you know, it's something that we have had to live with for thousands of years. It's not really new in that sense. So that's not like to say that martyrdom is something we wish on everyone. But it's a reality of being a person of faith, Christian or Jewish or otherwise. We saw in Christchurch, you know, Muslims being shot up for their faith. So it's just the way of the world that there's religious violence. So does anyone want to add anything on the hate speech topic? We're planning to go until 10 p.m. So that gives us about 17 minutes. So we can shift into questions from the chat, or people can just suggest topics.
I was just going to say, I was going to ask Yoko and Nobita, I was going to ask you if you guys are familiar with Jeffrey Epstein and the case surrounding him, as well as his madam. How do you pronounce her first name? Giselle or Giselle? Maxwell?
Lane or something. Yeah, something like that.
Mrs. Maxwell, his madame, as it were.
Yeah.
And she's now in police custody. I'm just wondering, how long do you guys think until she has a mysterious suicidal accident?
Do you guys know about the Epstein case at all?
Are you guys familiar with the Epstein case?
I don't know.
I've heard of the name, but I haven't looked into it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll just say I'm gonna guess. I'll give her maybe a week and a half or so. I think that she'll probably disappear, or maybe they'll claim it's COVID or something like that.
Yeah.
So short version of it for Yoko and Nobita, Epstein was a very wealthy pedophile who had connections to a lot of politicians and celebrities in Western countries. And then when he was finally arrested, he died under mysterious circumstances in prison, supposedly hanging himself, which a lot of people predicted would happen. So now this other woman who's connected to him was arrested. And basically all of us are just waiting for her to be, quote unquote, suicided, to commit suicide. It's a little bit of a dark subject, but yeah, maybe we'll get into something that we're
maybe we'll just shelf that topic. I was
also, we're probably demonetized now.
I was just kind of curious if this sort of if you guys had heard about it, but that's okay if you haven't. It's not that important.
The interesting part of that is how you guys say like, oh, we are waiting for her to hang herself or something like that. But I found that interesting because in Japan we have death sentence, but in America it varies on each state, right? So you guys not all states have death penalty. So
yeah, I think it's about half of them. I could be maybe 30. Is that right? I don't know. It's something like that.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. You guys put it in like that.
We have a super chat. Do you want to see what that says?
Yeah.
Maybe it's a question.
Wait, how do I go back here?
Okay. Oh, wow. 4 heavy hitters of intellect. In respect, I guess, to controversy, wonderful food to my mind and soul. Okay. Thank you for the donation, Droc Halsey. Cool.
Wow.
Thank you.
Good night and good luck. Okay. So, Nobita, Yoko, any other issues you'd like to bring up, or should we just take questions?
So I'm gonna just ask you guys quickly. Recent NHK controversy. So NHK got slammed by for the offensive video.
Yeah. Oh, is that the cartoon one? Is that?
I saw it.
Okay, so I wanna just you guys quickly. The thoughts.
I saw it. I didn't think it was offensive, actually. If I remember it correctly, the black guy in that video was like super muscular.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. He was ripped. I mean, if anything, that's a compliment, right? You're not making him like. I mean, he looked like he was like really fit, very, and.
Yeah. I appreciated it actually that they assume that all of us black people are super masculine and huge like that. I didn't consider it offensive because I don't expect the Japanese media to accommodate Western cultural mores and sensitivities and expectations. I think this is a kind of entitlement to go into a foreign country and expect them to cater to your sense of humor,
your cultural idiosyncratic sort of behaviors, or your taboos, or whatever your culture. Yeah, I agree.
This is why I wasn't offended by the blackface thing. There was a story about Japanese comedians doing blackface at times, and it doesn't mean the same thing. It's not offensive. It's not like it's coming from the same history. And I
it's
think
also not coming from a malicious intent as well.
No, it's not. Blackface is actually pretty common. It's in a lot of cultures, as you see it in like Northern Europe. So, this attitude of looking for things to be offended about, I think is a very psychologically unhealthy way of living. And also, I think that I've written about this on my blog. I think this is a unique kind of Western entitlement, particularly from white Westerners, where they go to foreign countries and act really surprised that the people have a different culture from Western ones. They get like surprised, like, whoa, how come they're not feminist and multiculturalist? And how come they don't cater to my beliefs about gender and stuff? It's like, this is a foreign country, dude. This idea that the Western culture is this global default, I think it's kind of sad. It's like, it shows just how eviscerated Western cultural identity has become. They have no sense of norms anymore, that other people have different, distinct ways of living. And I've seen this even at my own workplace at times. It's unfortunate. It's really
it's cultural and intellectual imperialism, actually. And if you want to think about it, I mean, yeah, exactly. Yeah. When you go to another country, or other countries have different ways of expressing themselves that you somehow will take offense to, I think is kind of, it's imperialistic, really, mentally.
It's culturally chauvinistic. Yeah, we talked about this last time, and I'll bring it up again just because it's eternal lulls. But as you recall, Kanada-jin-san, your girlfriend, that YouTuber, a Canadian girl who lives in Japan, who identifies as Japanese, even though she's a white girl, and then she started identifying as Muslim. I had an interaction with her because she's just fascinating, where I said to her, you can't really identify as Japanese just because you've lived in Japan for a few years. This is actually kind of culturally chauvinistic and imperialistic of you, because you're imposing on the Japanese a Western notion of identity, this idea that you can go to a country and live there for a couple of years and then expect to be on the same standing as the natives. This is a very Western idea. It's not something they believe in China and Japan. Like, if a black person is born in China and they grow up there their whole life, they're still not going to be thought of as Chinese, because their definition of Chinese is by blood. It's an ethnicity. It's a people, right? It's not soil. And she blocked me when I pointed that out. But anyway, it's fine. Sometimes that happens. We have some super chats. Cool. Shall I read that?
Is that Cantankerous? Is that Dan? I wonder.
It might be.
Maybe we should speak in Japanese.
Sure. Many people don't have access to your ideas due to the language barrier. I'd like to localize your videos. Title, subtitle in my native language. Would you be on board with something like that? So Felix, you got someone willing to help you out with the Black Pigeon Speaks channel, putting all the content into Japanese. How does that sound?
Yeah, it sounds great. Why not? Go for it. I'll help if you need it.
It sounds great. Okay, so we'll
there's another one I think that comes from Dan, who's in our Discord group, Cantankerous.
Oh yeah, I remember Dan.
Okay. Dan in Kansas, moving down to Kansas right now. He's in Michigan. And
do you see the other one?
Yeah, this is for Nobita and Yoko. It's a question. What is the Japanese people's general opinion of Joe Biden?
I honestly, I still have no idea what he's doing, like his actual policies. Yeah. So I don't think any Japanese media reports that actually. It's almost about Trump, I think.
Yeah. And that seems deliberate. They don't want it to be about Biden. They want it to just be about Trump. Yoko, do you know anything about Biden?
Well, at least conservatives here think of him as pro-China, so they don't want Joe Biden to win. And me personally, when I look at the name Joe Biden, I'm like, creepy Joe. I can't unsee the pictures and videos of him like sniffing on the girls' shoulders and hairs and so on. Like,
Are you talking about big old Joe and he's sniffing all the young girls' hair?
Yeah. I'm seeing it and I'm like, oh no. And he is also pro-China. So I'm like, like I can't believe that he's the best that Democrats can do. Like something is wrong with the American system.
Yeah, it is sort of.
So one of my coworkers actually said that. So she doesn't know about any other candidates other than Trump. So she said she would have to choose like anyone other than Trump, or she can't vote in the first place because there is no other good candidates.
Yeah, as I said, I think that's the goal. They don't want it to be about Biden. They want it to be about Trump, because Biden is kind of an empty suit. He can barely talk. He's probably totally demented at this point. The more he talks, the more he makes people cringe. He said a while ago that if you don't support Democrats, then you're not black. He's basically saying that all black people have to vote Democrat. And he has a lot of really horrible videos and images of himself. So I think the goal is to try to cancel the debates, keep him off of TV, and just hope that there's enough negative news about Trump that his base stays home and he loses the election that way. They don't want it to be about Biden, I think.
Do you think there'll be debates?
I'm wondering that too, because where is Joe Biden? You don't hear about him at all. So even like what you guys, like Nobita was saying, like nobody even knows what is, who is this guy? I agree.
I think that's the goal. He's an empty suit, and he's gonna do one term. What's really important is his vice presidential choice. because that's really who they're going to be getting behind.
Oh,
Another super chat: Biden is a placeholder candidate. Yeah, basically, I think that's the case.
so I'm wondering. Most black people, like generally speaking, like vote Democrat Party, right?
Yes.
Generally.
Yes.
This time, do you think this time too? Or maybe Kenya West?
Oh, I think we had. Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear the last thing you said there. I just kind of blanked out for a second.
So recently, Kenya West, he said.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kanye.
He
So
won.
Kanye
so what?
West.
Do I think he's going to get any votes?
Yeah. So do you think most black people vote for Democratic Party this time too?
Or for Kanye West instead?
Yeah.
That's a really amazing question.
Because he's a black person, right?
Yeah, last I checked, yes.
Yeah. So
that's
I assume they want black president, right?
Well, yeah, I guess so. I mean, they sort of had one recently, to the extent that you think of Obama as black, which is a little debatable. But I think that Kanye probably would take more votes away from Biden than away from Trump. So he'll get a percentage. I don't know if he would get the majority of the black vote, because Kanye is also kind of a weird figure politically. You know, he supported Trump in the past, and he has his detractors. I think he would get a lot. It depends on how serious he is. The problem is he announced very late. He might not be able to get on the ballot.
That's what I was thinking too. Yeah.
So it might be difficult for him to seriously compete, but that might not be the goal. I wonder how serious he is about this run. I feel like maybe he has an album coming out. Maybe this is just about attention, and I wonder if it is deliberately a political thing. Maybe he actually just wants to help Trump. Maybe he just says, this will take some votes away from the Democrats. So that's my sense of it.
When it comes to that, do you think conservative blacks, it's actually quite rising nowadays? Do you think so?
So I think that you have to think of it as two questions. Do I think a large percentage of blacks are going to vote Republican or right wing? I think no, probably not. Do I think that there is some growing conservative sentiment within the black community? I think so. I think there's definitely more consciousness raising, more discussion about family issues, social issues, and more openness to looking at outside of the left as their only source of strength. So I do think that there's growing diversity within black political and intellectual discussion. I think Trump actually helped a lot with that in 2016. It kind of threw a monkey wrench into the whole political process. But I don't expect any huge support from black people for the Republicans. I still think, especially with these riots, with the Black Lives Matter protests, I still think they're pretty tied to the Democrats.
Do you remember you and I had a conversation about the future of the United States and how I thought that the future of the United States would be a whiter future, in the sense that there's going to be a lot more interracial marriages and a lot more. And I have a feeling once you kind of remove a lot of the sort of racial aspects to American politics, I think you could get back to a place where things were based more on ideology or beliefs rather than just race. This is something that'll take 50 years, mind you, and you and I will be dead by that point. But if we live live a long time,
I might make it.
Yeah. My point is I think that what you have to do in America, kind of answering Nobita, is you have to deracialize the politics around things like, as Joe Biden says, if you don't vote Democrat, you ain't black. And it's just like they've got this attitude that, certain races have to vote certain ways, regardless of what it helps them, right? So I think the aspect of American society that'll have to change, and I think will change as interracial marriages become more common. I think that there's going to be less charged, hopefully, less racism. I mean, because not the racism, but just the racial tension in Western society as we become more diverse is not getting better; it's getting worse. I would say. I mean, when I was a kid, there wasn't this like aspect of race injected into everything the way it is now. You could have Lando Calrissian be a black man in the original Star Wars, and he was a good character. Like it wasn't something that
less politicized.
It wasn't politicized. I mean,
all of the best movies were like that. I mean, you watch like Ghostbusters, you watch Predator. You watch all those movies had relatively diverse casts, and it wasn't a statement. It wasn't this big deal. Now it's always politicized, and in a sense, I think culture and media it's always political to a degree. I actually wrote an essay about that. But I think that we're not going to see things. I'm a little bit skeptical that the solution is interracial marriage.
I'm not saying that's the solution. I'm saying that's going to happen more and more as time goes by. I mean, I think it's inevitable, to be honest.
Yeah. No, I think it is. To a degree, I think it's inevitable in the United States just because of how diverse it is.
Yeah, and it might not everywhere in the world. There's still be like Japan will still be 99% Japanese. I was talking more about America.
I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical that will deracialize everything, though, because what I've seen in the Black community in particular is that a lot of the most militant activists are very light skinned. They're very
like Malcolm X.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he's not even Black, but I mean, we're talking about like guys like Colin Kaepernick and some of the other leaders of Black Lives Matter. It tends to be these light skinned types that have no sense of identity or belonging, that cling to these racial movements to kind of overcompensate and prove themselves. And that's something that I don't know that is going to become less of a problem with more interracial marriage. I'm not against interracial marriage. I think it can create conflicts, and I think there are trade-offs to it. But I don't have a problem with it. But I don't see it as necessarily a solution. We're coming up on 10 o'clock. In case we want to wind down, are there any final questions or statements?
Sorry, I want to ask you. So when it comes to that, so about the NHK controversy, so
yes,
most people got angry about that. White people, actually.
Yeah, sure.
Every time that kind of like race, kind of offensive things happened, like majority people are offended are white people.
Right.
You're tapping into something there, buddy.
Yeah.
Why more white people are offended? Maybe more than Black people, actually. So
because they have nothing else. They have nothing else driving them. They're looking for a cause. They're looking for some kind of spiritual motivation, some sort of social justice crusade, something like some kind of story or moral narrative to give meaning to their lives. And so they need Black people to be oppressed. They need Black people to be victims so that they can save them, so that they can see them as an object of their own heroic self-narrative. And so that's why they're so motivated to infantilize them and see them this way, which is really tragic, because what Black people really need is self-determination, is to get away from these sorts of narratives of always being oppressed and always being under the foot of other cultures. We need to get away from this type of thinking.
I think that it's psychologically, they are basically censoring themselves. So, and that's what feeds their ego. And so like, that's what they want to get validated for.
Yeah.
So that's why they feel good. And then because they are censoring, and even though it feels good to a certain extent, like egoism, but they want to force that to others to suffer together. Like that's how I see psychologically that I'm censoring myself. You better be as well.
Yeah.
Kind of that.
Yeah.
Very bad idea.
It's a desire for self-esteem. People need to feel good about themselves. It's the most critical human desire, is the ability to look in the mirror and like what you see. And so that's really what I think motivates it, is that desire to feel like a good person.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. Oh,
No, go ahead.
So
Go ahead,
I feel more nervous when I'm talking with white people actually recently. Yeah,
Somebody cut out this part and make a video.
yeah, I feel more pressured when talking
Yeah.
with white people actually.
Censored.
I totally agree.
Americans, white
Yeah.
Americans.
Oh, man.
I completely agree. I 100% agree. I have complete comfort talking to other Black people. I don't care what their politics are. It's totally fine. It's when I'm talking to other white people in Japan who tend to be very left of center, that's when I feel like I have to be careful. I have to walk on eggshells because they are sensitive as fuck.
I would agree. Just even like, for example, like within our circle of friends here in Tokyo, our circle of friends is kind of, it's a bit of a motley crew. But
Yeah,
generally
it is.
speaking, I feel more comfortable talking to Black people about, especially Black people I've never really interacted with or I don't know very well. I generally feel like I'm on safer ground than it is when I'm talking to like a white person I don't know very well. Like, because white people are able to like just freak the hell out, easily.
Yeah, they always get up in their feelings. I don't know. I think that this is a whole other stream, but there is generally a big spiritual problem in the white Western culture as well. It's not the same as the Black people issue, but they have their own issues that they have to sort out and figure out. Okay. I think we have to wind down. It's past 10.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
we're gonna call it. This was a lot of fun. We got to do this again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to do it again. Let's not wait as long as we did this time to do it next time.
Absolutely. We'll stay in touch. We have the email group and we'll sort something out. Thanks a lot, everyone in the chat, for all the questions, donations. Thanks a bunch. Yoko, you can take us out.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you guys. I will end now. So thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Cheers.